Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
In this lecture, I will look at the effects of the emerging economic structure on the Indian social structure. In doing so, I will have to talk about what's called this phenomenon of embourgeoisement. I will spend some time on it, but basically I've already talked about how what's happening to the approach of all governments towards economic growth has been that economic growth should also simultaneously address this question of equality, address the issue of providing, including larger and larger segments of the population which is oppressed and marginal, in the process, including them in the process of economic development. This was that's why the policies were designed in order to ensure both economic growth and equity. I have also mentioned that there was a hope raised very early, that in the early days of India's independence, that we will attain with development, we will attain a classless and casteless society. Now it's time for us to examine how the Indian society has changed. As I have pointed out in my earlier lectures on how the economic growth has affected caste and religious minorities and so on, what emerges clearly is that instead of caste becoming instead of caste disappearing, instead notions of caste and caste loyalties becoming losing their hold over the public imagination. In fact, identity politics based on caste and communities have become very prominent. Therefore, caste consciousness of communal consciousness, all these have sharpened. And I also showed how that despite attempts to provide reservations, despite policies aimed at providing reservations, all right, for the backward and the Dalits, ultimately we have not succeeded effectively in bringing them into the mainstream, although we have raised their hopes that they will also become part of the mainstream. Now, naturally, therefore, there is this caste consciousness and community consciousness has become very prominent today. Now, I should also mention that is become so prominent for yet another reason. That also I have discussed. That's this caste and community identities have become sharper for the reason that the economy, the economic situation today is generates insecurity amongst all classes. Even those who are well off, tend to be economically insecure because of the unpredictability of the market forces. So, if anything, that's why that's what this is one of the major reasons why there has been a clamor for reservations among the dominant castes who have had a dominant share of power and who have taken advantage of the economic opportunities that opened up and have prospered. This, in order to understand this, in order to understand why the clamor for reservations among the dominant castes are also is getting shrill, for that we will have to look at the class structure. I think what has happened is that these reservation policies, egalitarian policies have worked, but they have only worked in a segmental fashion. They have not generated forces strong enough to liquidate the identities of caste and communities. Of course, true, there are beneficiaries among the Dalits of these reservation policies. They have also, as I had mentioned, now there is a Dalit Chamber of Commerce. There are several Dalit entrepreneurs who have built international reputation as big entrepreneurs. True, this has happened, but this is only a segment of the Dalits or a segment of the backward castes have been able to corner these benefits. Now it has not percolated, it has not become widespread. Actually what has happened is that while what has happened is there has been a class differentiation within these castes. You talk about the Marathas, there are Marathas who have done exceedingly well in the professions. They have done exceedingly well as entrepreneurs. They have done exceedingly well as politicians, as political leaders, but yet there are segments of their community who are still rural, who are in fact lagging behind in education, all right, and their conditions have not improved substantially. So there is a class differentiation that has come up, and whereas there is a creamy layer of Marathas who have made spectacular gains, there are others who have lagged behind and who are who's in fact not only lagged behind, perhaps their situation has become worse than it was earlier, because agriculture was earlier was a more productive activity during the times of green revolution times than it is now. So because of these there's in every caste there has been class differentiation. So what has happened is that we have now a middle class a new middle class has emerged, educated, professional, technically competent middle class, highly skilled middle class has emerged from all the castes, from a wider spectrum, not all the castes, from a wider spectrum of castes. This is the creamy, actually I can say that this is the creamy layer. This middle class, this new middle class is the creamy layer. But while they are, you see, when they become prosperous, the middle class has expanded. When you become prosperous, you bring along with it, ideas of cosmopolitanism, ideas, you consider, you'll start, realizing that caste is only a cultural marker. You will not, you will think that you will start realizing that rituals are not that important, rituals of purity and pollution are not that important, and you will become a more universal, more cosmopolitan person, willing to engage with people of different castes as on equal as your equals and so on. But this kind of modernization has not occurred amongst many of these upwardly mobile castes, because along with it, as they have become, as they have gained they have become prosperous, the notion of modernity itself is being attacked, the notion of rationality is being attacked, and that's the worldwide trend. And along with it, now these same middle classes want to, there is a tendency in them to go back to their roots and traditions and revive them as a mark of their new identity, as they want to assert their new identity, because they want to gain social esteem. They want to convert their newfound prosperity into social esteem. So what happens is, there is a tendency for them to, this happens in all sections of the middle classes. There is a tendency to go back to religion, go back to their traditional customs, and highlight them, proudly, proudly work for its cause and all that. So as a consequence of this, what has happened is that these middle classes, especially the politically aware middle classes, are using their, for instance, their kin and caste ties to mobilize political support for them. All right. So what has happened is, instead of caste consciousness disappearing, evaporating into thin air, caste consciousness has become even greater today. And as I mentioned in one of the earlier lectures, the champions of Hindutva, the foot soldiers of Hindutva, were actually the people, the beneficiaries of reservations. They were in the lead in the movement for Ram Janmabhoomi, for instance. All right. One of the progressive thinkers, leading distinguished progressive thinkers, bemoaned this, the fact that Dalits have become great followers of right-wing parties, and that they should actually, it is in their class interest to identify themselves with more revolutionary political parties. But that does not happen. That did not happen. So what has happened is, because of this, in fact, caste and communal identities have gained strength, and caste clashes and community clashes become very significant. This is one. I want to mention this. This is very important. I want to mention this, that along with it, let me elaborate this for a little more. I've talked about caste and community clashes. You see, because this section of the new middle class, right? This new middle class is intensely conscious, proud of their caste identity. They become intensely proud of their caste identity. And what happens is that they also resist attempts to the processes in society which churns up social relationships, especially marital relationships. Now there is because women are regarded as the symbols of a particular caste, or symbols of, or the flag bearers of caste identity, or the big what shall I say, they mark the boundaries of caste. All right. So yes, whenever weddings take place, whenever marriages take place across down the caste hierarchy, all right. When a woman higher in the caste hierarchy chooses, this is also a process of modernization, this is bound to happen, chooses somebody, you know, of a lower caste, then there is, you know, community reaction is you know, very severe, it becomes very severe, and there are instances, for instance, there are, you know, reports, for instance, we are familiar with reports of Khaps, you know, Jat, Khap organizations among the Jats, you know, prohibiting inter-Gotra marriages. Of course, they will not only prohibiting, they even pass death sentences. I don't know who will carry out those death sentences on those who marry, you know, on women who marry, you know, say a boy from a Dalit community. Similarly, in Tamil Nadu, instances of caste atrocities and caste, all right, caste atrocities, atrocities on Dalits flare up if there are, you know, if an educated Dalit, you know, if an educated Dalit boy, you know, engineer, you know, falls in love with his colleague in his office who happens to come from an upper caste. So, and he marries her, then you know, such couples have been killed in open daylight, broad daylight, in you know, in shopping, in front of shopping malls, and nobody has protested. This kind of atrocities, you know, are on the increase because, you know, this women have become the tatum poles of these castes, and they think that, you know, women are, you know, bringing down the honor of their particular caste or community. And this is also the reason why there is so much of tension and tension caused by this notion of love jihad, because conspiracy theory, this is a conspiracy theory adduced by the votaries of, you know, by the votaries of right-wing parties, Hindu right-wing parties. They say, for instance, love jihad is rampant in certain, you know, in the coastal Karnataka, and in Kerala. They want to prevent it. They want to monitor young women. They want to make sure that young women do not mix with their, you know, classmates, college-going women, do not mix with their, you know, classmates, boys. Usually, it's the boys, Muslim boys, who are more predominant rather than Muslim girls in these educational institutions, higher educational institutions. So there is a tendency for you know, women, Hindu young women, you know, mixing with young Muslim boys and ultimately getting married to them. This is resisted by Hindu right-wing organizations and is given a political color. The point that I am trying to make is that this rise of this new middle class has resulted in these caste tensions and communal tensions, and in fact it has you know, it has instead of the political discourse that we are having is very recursive political discourse. It's not, you know, it does not promote inclusion, it does not promote in the name of nationalism, it is producing, it is generating more of, it's generating alienation, a sense of alienation among minorities, among the Dalits and other oppressed sections of society. And you know, instead of promoting nationalism, they talk about nationalism. Instead of promoting nationalism, they may even, you know, intensify anti-national sentiments. Of course, this I'm only telling you one portion of the story. There is also the other side of the story, that is that fundamentalisms, Islamic fundamentalisms also have become are now on the ascendant, as a consequence of which there is this widespread Islamophobia, fear of Islam, fear of political Islam from spreading, and converting, everyone who comes, who comes under its influence. So that kind of thing also is encouraging these kinds of divisions and polarizations. That is one consequence of this is the consequence. This doesn't really promote inclusion. All right. Now, fortunately, the middle class has two faces, or maybe it is three faceted, three faces. The other portion of the middle class is the more, there is another section of the middle class which is before I go on to talk about the other section of the middle class, I also want to mention one thing. Those who do not, I talked about class differentiation within castes. So the underclass of in each of these castes, you will find a bottom layer of unemployed or not fully employed young men and women, in the poor young men and women who are looking for employment, or because they don't get any job, or they don't want to work in some cases, they become, they join politics. In politics also it's very interesting. In politics, one way of becoming prominent in politics is by doing, is by displaying yourself, especially before television cameras and all that, by deliberately becoming a nuisance, by say burning effigies, or by doing something spectacular. Nowadays even murder is becoming a spectacle. All right. And those people who indulge in, who take their law into their own hands and punish, and do the moral policing and punish people who they think are violating the Hindu sentiments, or sentiments of other religions. What they do is that they will take law into their own hands. They will indulge in violence, and which will be recorded on TV, so that they will become popular, politically popular, and political parties thrive on these kinds of people to mobilize crowds. So what happens is that because of the differentiation, class differentiation within castes, you have an army, a ready-made muscle power available for your demonstrations, so that there are political leaders in these castes, in these right-wing parties, can use these, younger, what I call the lumpenized section, who are not, become part of the mainstream, who cannot become part of the mainstream, or even if they do, they are in the lower rungs of employment. It's they who become the muscle power for various kinds of violent spectacles that are projected on the TV from time to time, in favor of the right wing parties, of one type or the other, or in favor of even parties which claim to be centrist. They also use these anti-social elements to their advantage. So, on the one hand, there is this kind of economic growth has generated these kinds of polarizing tendencies. On the other hand, there is, as I said, there is also a middle class which is more, what shall I say, which is more enlightened, and which is more an enlightened segment, which is concerned about broader national issues, broader issues of secularism, idea of democracy, idea of citizens' rights, and this class, which is dominating now more and more, it's dominating the this segment, which is dominating some of the national media. So they are also journalists, professionals, and they they were in the forefront of the in bringing out incidents of corruption, in exposing incidents of corruption that occurred in different parts of the country, by different people and in different parts of the country, and bringing and raising the consciousness of citizenship. All right, consciousness of citizenship, raising issues of liberty in a very big way. So there is also a segment of the middle class which is more cosmopolitan, as I said, more enlightened. All right. The problem is, it is arguing for rights of citizens, liberty, and so on. And then also talks about secularism, secular values. All this is very noble, high-sounding ideas, noble ideas, and I think we should give the credit where it's due. I think the Aam Aadmi phenomenon, the AAP party, when it thanks to the AAP party, there was a big, I think there was a big demonstration against corruption in Delhi, in 2012, 2011, 2012, and this party was exceedingly successful in mobilizing, not only Delhi citizens but also thanks to Anna Hazare, of course. Anna Hazare led the movement. So, but the notion, the thesis that this party, this middle class party, this middle class outfit, not organization, advocated was, it's because of corruption that India is lagging behind, and it's because of corruption there is so much of crime, there is so much of that we are getting, the citizens are not getting their rights, and governance has been very shoddy, and it's because of corruption that women are getting raped in streets and the police look the other way, and it's because of corruption that there are these atrocities and so on. It's a this new middle class, this middle class has played a very continues to play a very influential role in Indian politics, but unfortunately, the problem is that the problem is that this is they're now talking to this particular class that the influence is confined to the media. All right, it's very influential, but at the same time, the very fact that they mainly use English, all right, and the fact that they cannot link themselves with effectively with you know with the elite, with the intellectuals and the middle class, that are new middle classes that are emerging in the states, who I call the vernacular elite. So unfortunately, because of that, these it's very easy to point out. It's also easy to effectively counter them, their ideas, and to point out that their own ideas of universalism, their own ideas of secularism are really biased, or biased by their own by their own interests and their own cultural moorings. So it's become difficult. The problem is that India is now not in a mood for a dialogue, and this is also because what has happened is that Professor Amartya Sen said that Indian tradition, the Indians are argumentative. He wrote this book titled The Argumentative Indian, saying that Indians want to resolve their problems through argumentation. There we are very fond of arguing with each other till we come to till we resolve problems. But unfortunately, today the scope for argumentation has shrunk enormously. That's because there is no scope for dialogue possible. Actually, what's happening, if you look at the media, the discussions on television channels, you will find that people are usually talking across each other. No one is hearing, if there are two opponents, two people with opposing points of view who are appearing on the TV, they are not they are not taking the argument of the rival seriously and countering it with reasoned responses. Instead, they shout at each other. This is the same is this is, in fact, this tendency is enhanced by the social media, that is the Facebook and Twitter that we have, where people freely abuse people you don't people they don't like. This is called trolling, both on the Facebook and on Twitter. If you see the conversations, people sometimes resort to very debasing in language to attack public figures who they don't like, and then they use all kinds of pejorative adjectives to condemn them. So the point that I'm trying to make is that we have the middle classes are not proving earlier. I should mention this too. The middle classes, if you look at the history of freedom struggle, all right, you will find that so ever since the freedom struggle times, and even during our the time when India had adopted socialist planning, and even till very recently, the middle classes played a leading role in determining the national question, the national agenda, the agenda that the Indian political system has to address itself to. And it's the middle class which won it is not wrong to say, it's the middle class which won the freedom for the country. All right. Having said this, now the middle class is itself divided, and apart from that, we have this an underclass which I call the lumpen class, which is getting lumpenized, brutalized. I'll give you one example. When the Nirbhaya incident occurred, naturally the public attention was riveted on the victim of rape, of the, it was a, terribly brutal rape, all right, and it stirred our conscience. It stirred all Indians' conscience. But in all this, in all the, talk that followed that rape and all the agitations that took place and all that, what we missed out is something very sociologically very interesting. All right, I think this is also the reason why rape has become a major issue in national discourse today, especially rape of middle class women has become a national issue because of this. You see, who were the attackers? Who were the rapists? One of them was not even an adult. He was only a child. All right, he was regarded as, he was less than 16 years old, and it's reported that he was the most brutal of the three people who were found guilty. Now, what's very interesting is that you go into his background. It is it's a kind of, it's a background which sort of makes you understand why he indulged in this brutality. I think this boy was a runaway, from his home. He did not have any, he was living wherever he was living. He was not living with his parents, and he had been brutalized himself. For all you know, he has been made to work in that bus service, day and night for more than 12 hours a day. He had to work. He had to eat. He had to sleep in the bus. He had to eat whatever that's available, and for entertainment, maybe he was into drugs also, and he had been brutalized himself so much that in fact it was his attempt. He was this gruesome attack shows that he was a a pathological case, and that he had been so brutalized. If that is the condition, brutalized by poverty, brutalized by by the conditions of his of employment, all right, and inhumanity of treatment. You see, this is not just here. The Catherine Boo wrote a book called Behind the Beautiful Forever. I think I will give the exact title subsequently, but in that book, which is on a Mumbai slum, it shows it brings out vividly the brutalizing life of the slum dwellers. You see, for instance, this rag picker had to would sleep in the godown where in a small hut in which he stacks all his papers. He would sleep in that godown itself, but rats are running all over the show. Rats sometimes go and bite him, all right, and similarly the kind of viciousness amongst the neighbors in this in the slum, and how they betray each other just for paltry money. And then there is one incident that is recounted where boys from the slums are recruited by to work as waiters in a 5-star hotel, and they are very pleased that they are going to have a glimpse of the 5-star hotel for the first time. But when they are told not to look up, they have to take trays of drinks and food and other items and move around the invited guests. But they are put in uniform, but then they are told not to look at others, look at the guests in the eye. They should always keep their head low, and impose all terrible conditions of work. They have to they are made to work till they get totally exhausted, and they, of course, they get a meal. But the thing is that in this kind of a condition, in this kind of a in these kinds of living conditions that obtained in these slums among the poor, naturally they'll get brutalized. And these people who talk about violence becoming the norm, violence and rape becoming the norm in the country, and that they do not realize that economic development, economic growth has also produced these lumpen elements. They are also our children. Maybe they are they are from poor, broken families, all right, but they are from female-headed households. They have been forced to go out, to earn their living at a very young age. So what do you know? Given this kind of a lumpenization, how can you talk about inclusive growth? You can't. So what I am trying to say is that look at it from any angle, you will find that we have not, our agenda of promoting inclusive growth, let alone transformative growth, has not succeeded. Now, I will spend the rest of the time that I have to talk about what can be done given this situation. I don't want to end on a pessimistic note. Therefore, I want to divert my attention on what can be done to reverse these trends, and can we really attain sabke saath sabka vikas that the government, which is on the government's plate today. This is the big question. What should be done? You see, as we have this demographic dividend, we have these youngsters coming into the labor force, but we have to provide them employment, we have to give them training in various types of skills, and the government has engaged in a program of skill development. But is that enough? Will they find jobs? Even if they are trained, will they find jobs? Are there enough jobs being created? For a variety of reasons, economic growth has to pick up speed much more, and it's not happening. All right. I think the government has adopted the mission mode. All right, which is not really new, which was introduced by Rajiv Gandhi, to tell the truth, when he used his friend, when he gave the task to his friend Sam Pitroda to provide telephonic services, to extend telephonic services all over the country. And I think he was the person who was instrumental for providing a cheap STD connections, and I think he was also one of the persons, pioneers, who introduced mobile telephony. But be that as it may, he did it using the mission mode. That is, an organization is set up dedicated to this task, and whatever it wants to do, all the bureaucracy is told that to clear the way, to cater to all the demands that this organization makes, so that it succeeds. Rajiv Gandhi also started the Clean Ganga project on a mission mode, in the mission mode, but he did not, that did not work out. So the government is adopting mission mode to build road infrastructures, to build village roads and several other things, to improve the economic infrastructure of the economic infrastructure, which will of course be effective. But then, and also government has several Make in India Make in India program and startup program and various other programs. It wants to encourage entrepreneurs, innovators, innovation and so on and so forth. But as of now, the approach has always been that first you promote development, promote growth, increase growth, and then take care of the distributional aspects. By increasing the size of the cake, then you can divide the cake and distribute it to everyone. Now there is also the basic universal income idea that's cropped up, so that you can distribute, because you cannot provide jobs for everybody, because growth tends to be jobless. So you provide basic universal basic income. I think that is looking at the strategy of economic growth, strategy of inclusive growth in the wrong way. I think we will have to ensure that the people, those who are coming into the labor force are not only found jobs, but also they are provided with skills to ensure that they will be employed even when the jobs that they are doing sort of become obsolete, and they have to again look for other jobs. So what I mean to say is that there should be a program, a constant program of skilling and reskilling the workers. There is like in college education, you have to train workers continuously on a continuous basis, so that at every level they learn new skills which are very valuable in the market. That is one program that's what they should do. When you want to reskill, when you want to retrain the youth, in this fashion, you also have to have a vision of what the future holds. Unfortunately, so far, maybe the government is actively thinking of doing it, but so far I do not see any signs of the government seriously taking up this issue of creating a vision of India in the future. That is because why I think it's very important is technology is changing rapidly. You see, even when we were thinking of investing in rapid industrialization and providing workers, providing people with factory employment, they'll become industrial workers, all right. Even when we are thinking along those lines, the technology has changed so much. For instance, in car production, most of the technology, earlier, car assembly plant, Ford and other companies, all right, they required thousands of workers in a plant to deliver, to produce cars. Now, most of the jobs are taken over by robots, which do and they are also controlled by computer controlled. They can do a much better job than the human beings who are who are working on the assembly line. So given this, that similarly now they are talking about artificial intelligence. and several corporations in America are already, investing in artificial intelligence, which is, which is one step ahead. You can also the artificial intelligence not only can converse with you, can also sense. This is like of course, the artificial intelligence has produced computers which can defeat even the world champion, because and then also now there are computers which can sense emotions, which can decipher languages, which can understand languages, even the accents, and respond on the basis of that, we respond to human voice the way other human beings respond. And of course, that there is, we have Elon Musk, has already, is already producing driverless cars, which the cars have computer systems which take in, which study the scene as the car moves. It studies the scene and applies its brake and its clutch in such a way that and then if you give the map, if you would give your destination where you have to go, it will take you. You don't have to drive the car at all. Of course, there are some controversies about that, because one or two cars got into accidents. But this is the way the future. This is the trend of the future. So what do you have to? And then our Minister Gadkari makes a statement when somebody asked him, "What about how will you combat these driverless cars?" All right. He had no answer. I don't think we'll need it. All right. I don't think we'll need driverless cars. All right. Because if we get these driverless cars, then what will our drivers do? They will be unemployed. That was his response. All right. In which case, why do you need bullet train? One can argue that way. So, but instead of that, one should, instead of reacting like that, one should have a plan ahead. One should plan ahead. One should ensure that we invest sufficiently in research and technology in diverse direction. I think we need to invest more in education. I think we need to encourage more all these corporations, private enterprises to actively promote research and development in different areas. And of course, there are, and they have human resources here. Even those people in Google and in, Apple Corporation or in Microsoft, many of them are Indians, trained in India, trained in IITs. I don't think there is any dearth of Indian talent. The point is, we need to harness our talents to produce jobs for the future. To ensure it's absolutely necessary that India has to, solve its not only problem of poverty, has to solve its problem of inclusion in a big way, so that India has become, as I had mentioned earlier, India has become a big economy, and it has to play a role, an important role in world affairs, in world economic affairs, and make sure that Indian voice for peace and harmony is heard everywhere. In order to do that, in order that the world takes us seriously, we have to take seriously the issue of inclusive growth, the issue of promoting innovation in a big way, in promoting research in science and technology. In all this requires a not mindset, a policy, a kind of a think tank should evolve these. There is the Niti Ayog. I think they should be engaged in creating a vision for the 2020, 2020s. And if we are able to do that, and if we expand rapid, if we promote rapid economic growth, and if we are able to invest in research and development, I think it is possible to also ensure that Sabke Saath Sabka Vikas becomes a realizable target, and we will not only achieve inclusive growth, our growth will be transformative.